Welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Guru Show. The Premier League is back. No more international football until probably March, and it is good to see because I don't know about you, Haider, but I hate international football.
You and me both, mate. I think we're probably one of the few people are watching it and stuff, but I just have zero interest. Like you said
Don't
the other
care.
day to me, I just don't care. It's a good time to take a couple of weeks off of football because, as you know, being a Man United fan is extremely stressful. So taking a couple of weeks off, I'm ready to come back, but I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm buzzing for this weekend. Maybe it's just because we're playing West Brom. But yeah, good to be back and good to be talking some fantasy football with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, anytime United's on TV, whether we're playing crap or playing well, it's better than having to force myself to watch some international game. I just can't get into it unless it's a big competition, and it doesn't help for me that Ireland are so bad and I don't like watching them. I'd rather watch paint dry. So
Yeah, they're
anytime
not
the
very
Premier
good.
League is back, it's always good. The issue I think that international football normally has is injuries, people coming back late, and it affects the Premier League season. This year it's that and more. We have the COVID situation. We've mentioned it on many podcasts just how bad the situation becomes because, as we've seen, there's been a lot of players that are going to be missing this week, possibly next week, depending on when they test negative. Because I'll go through the list of, first of all, the kind of COVID test, because I think that's the main one. Because, look, these are the tricky kind of situations because you don't know if it's just going to be 1 week and do you keep that player in your team. At least with injury, you know roughly how long that's going to be. So again, we'll go through the list. So the first one I said for Arsenal, they kind of helped themselves a little bit. It's only El Neni and Kolasinac. For Palace, look, the problem is Milivojevic is the main one. He's their kind of penalty taker, and he kind of makes them tick in midfield as well. Look, the big one everybody knows about is Mo Salah, and that's the one we'll be talking about a lot today. You have for Spurs, Doherty, and the problem there is there was actually a picture of the Wales and Ireland game where Gareth Bale was hugging Matt Doherty. So you have that one, and I don't know if there's been any confirmed if Bale has tested positive or negative. I don't think anything's come out about that, but that's one to look to over the next couple of days, because maybe he tests negative now, but maybe it could happen in a few more days where he tests positive. So that's another interesting one. For West Brom, you've Callum Robinson, who tested positive, who's been one of their main strikers this season. For Wolves, I know Connor Cody was a close contact to someone that tested positive, and then the same thing for Leeds as Rodrigo. I know the week before I think it was someone in the Spanish team tested positive and he was a close contact. I think he's back for this weekend, but I'm not entirely sure because there hasn't been any confirmation of that. The other one, that there was a lot of the players that were with Uruguay that tested positive. Now it seems that Edison Cavani is kind of cleared today because he was training with the United team. So just before we kind of go to the injuries, those first of all with the COVID test, for me, I think it's crazy that there's international football going on where all these players are traveling all around the world. Look, especially when in the bubble, it seemed that the Premier League were doing a pretty good job at kind of containing COVID, even though it's been rampant all throughout Europe over the last couple of weeks. And then, like the last international break, this happens, and then a lot of the players get COVID.
It's honestly the stupidest thing you could do. I really don't understand the reasoning. Well, we know why, don't we? We've said it many times.
Yeah,
If you're listening to this, I'm rubbing my fingers together because I'm talking about money. It's money, money, money. And how many times, Kieran, have we spoken about this? Where just think about it logically, right? So you're trying to contain a global pandemic, right? So you're allowing players from all over the world to meet up in one location, and bearing in mind they're from every single corner of the world, and then you're allowing them to like spend 2 weeks together. You don't know what the hell, who's got what. You don't know who's passing on what. They're playing other teams as well. So it's just, and then they're going to go back. It's just the stupidest thing, really. But I mean, looking at what it means for fantasy football, it's absolute chaos, mate. It's just, chaos is completely reigning FPL at the moment. And the international break has been really difficult, and it's particularly punishing with the injuries alone. And that's not even including, I mean, I didn't even realize how many, I didn't know Doherty was out with COVID. I didn't realize that. So that's news to me. But, you know, with several players now testing positive for COVID, it just completely messes up, if you're just looking at fantasy football, your selections, but also it's just dangerous, downright dangerous. And we've said before that when are we going to take this seriously, or when are the people that make the decision going to take it seriously? Does it take for, God forbid, a player to die or something like that? You know, it's absolutely crazy. But, you know, when you move on to, I suppose, just the normal team news, and you've always got to look at the people who travel the furthest or the latest people to return. And we've done this many times now. And I feel like since we've done this show, I'm much more tuned into that. It's something I never actually took into account when I used to do fantasy football. So this show has helped me massively. And I hope it's helped all the listeners as well. But South America, as usual, are always ones who usually return late. So you've got James again, Richarlison, Firmino, Tellez, who's also returned. And these are long haul flights back. So, you know, from your respective countries. So you're looking at possibly these players playing into the early hours of Wednesday. And you've already seen that Thiago Silva's been ruled out for fatigue. He's not exactly the youngest player. And then you've got England, Scotland, Ireland, Belgium, and the Netherlands all played Wednesday evening. Again, a lot of players played in that. And then you look at the African Cup of Nations, Mane, Ziyech, Mahrez, all played Tuesday afternoon. So I expect those three to be a little bit more better. But yeah, I just want to run through some of the players from certain teams that played the most minutes, because you just suspect that this is a very demanding season as it is.
Yeah.
Oh, man. And some of these players have played nearly 300 minutes in 2 weeks. So you're looking at Arsenal. Kieran Tierney played 300 minutes for Scotland. Saka played 232 for England, which is a lot. And you might even see that Saka might not play. Villa, Grealish played 227 minutes. We know Grealish played a lot. He was getting a lot of praise. Chelsea, Mason Mount played 206. James played 180. I believe Colombia only had 2 games. Leicester, Tielemans, 225. Liverpool, Robertson again, 210 minutes. City was interesting. Ferran Torres played 192. He's a very interesting one we can talk about later. Kevin De Bruyne, 180. United, McTominay. Seems the Scotland players played a lot, as we know. Pogba, 237 minutes. A lot of game time. We were thinking perhaps he might play, but to play that much in the space of, what, a couple of weeks? It's crazy. Spurs, Kane, 166. Son, 180. And Reguilon, 151. So putting all that together, including COVID, it's a really tough ask for us to select players, because I can't tell you who's going to start. You know, will Pogba start? I don't know. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on, you know, the sort of late returnees? Does that change the way that you think when you make your selections?
Yeah, it's a really tricky one. I think this international break more than others, because after the first international break, the season had only really started. There wasn't too many games in. But now you're at a point of you're not only coming back from international break, but there's also European football midweek as well for those kind of top 6 teams in the Premier League. And look, the majority of the players that people select in fantasy football are within those kind of top 6 teams anyway. So that's where all these headaches come in. And you mentioned all those minutes. You also have so many different players that had to pull out of, whether it was one game or at the start. Like, even just from going through my list of some of the names, you've mentioned Thiago Silva already, but like early on, I know there was a kind of a scare with Havertz where I think he tested positive and that he hasn't been fully fit and they're not sure if he'll play. You have Pulisic, who had to pull out of international. You have Easy for Palace, who had to pull out. Obviously, there's Gomez for Liverpool, Henderson, Trent, Fabinho. Basically, any defender that goes for Liverpool, maybe except for Andy Robertson, is probably out this week. So
even Robertson is. I was reading that he did pick up a knock, so he could be a damn. I mean, their defense is decimated, isn't it?
Which, look, we're going to talk about that one. That's going to be a really interesting game this week. Let's just say you probably want to be owning any striker that's going against Liverpool this week anyway. But then you look at City, Ake had to pull out, Sterling had to pull out, United, you had Rashford who had to pull out, Shaw's injured. All these games are just kind of coming up, and there's so many, because they're having to play so many games. You hear the managers talk about it, even in the press conferences today, that you've Lampard saying that it's ridiculous that there's any early kickoffs. It's funny how Klopp and Lampard are coming out now after Solskjaer is the first one to say that. And then also I think it was Pep and Klopp today said that it was ridiculous that the Premier League doesn't have 5 substitutions when every other league in the world this year is doing it. For me, it doesn't make sense either. You should be looking after the players' health. But look, we know that often the Premier League doesn't do that. And it's been a big issue. For me, because I do have Mo Salah this week, this is going to be a nightmare to kind of figure out what to do, because
yeah, I'm in the same boat.
The issue is, and we'll talk about this when we go through the fixtures in a minute, but the matchups this week, it looks like there could be a lot of goals this week, because you look at it and players coming back late, players getting injured, players having COVID, even the ones that are having COVID, they can't be around the team at all. So even when they come back, how fit are they? So it's a big issue. The Mo Salah one, while we say it's really bad for international football to go ahead, I think it also has to be the players have to kind of do their part as well when they're away on international duty. Because look, I don't know what it's like in England, but I know here in Ireland that there's a very limited amount of people that can go to things like weddings. And you saw the pictures of him there in a full wedding in Egypt. Now, obviously, the restrictions aren't as strict there, but he has to remember he's coming back to England where he's going to be around his teammates, and he can put some of those other teammates in danger. And look, if the Premier League season gets decided by one or two games, so 3 or 6 points this year, that can be a big reason why. So I think a lot of the players, while it's difficult to kind of stick to your bubble even when you're in international play, you really have to do what's best for your club as well, because even though you're going away on international duty, you're still representing your club that pays you.
Yeah, it's fantastic points. It's really difficult though, isn't it? Because players are still humans, and I agree with you, by the way. I mean, everyone's seen the Salah video. It's crazy. I mean, that's what happens in Arab weddings, as I do know as well. But in this time, you do have to think it's very negligent. But then also, look, it's difficult. Life is difficult right now. I mean, we all know that it's not normal, and it's been like this since March. So, what is normal anymore? And that's the thing. I know it's getting a little bit deep now, but you do have to say it's difficult though for players to turn around to a player and say you can't do this, you can't do that. Playing football and get consistently tested is a difficult thing in itself, right? And then you've got to play without fans, and all these things come into it. I mean, we might as well push forward onto some of that team news as well quickly, just to add to that. 'Cause I know you've done a really great run through, but I think you also need to look at United because they've got a favourable fixture. But Tellez looks like he's got a negative test. I mean, he seems to be changing every single day. Lindelof, Martial are going to be assessed. Cavani, as you said, he's back in training, so he's in contention. So, these are quite key players. Pogba, we don't know if he's going to play. And then even at Newcastle, the early kickoff, Callum Wilson is possibly available. But, you're right, this early kickoff, it's funny how Lampard does say it now, but the early kickoff is one which, it can go two ways. It could be an absolute drab affair, which is what I think it might be with Newcastle playing. I think they're going to play very conservative. Or the other thing is going to be a lot of goals because these players they'll forget everything and they'll just, they'll go out there and so it's very interesting. I mean, we might as well push on to the fixture list. I mean, I know you're going to run through them. What is your thoughts on it?
Like I kind of mentioned, I think there's a lot of goals that you can kind of look at here. You look at even the Saturday game. So you have the Newcastle and Chelsea game, like you mentioned. Depending on how that goes, Newcastle are a weird team. Some days you look at them and they look organised and they look very good. And then there's other weeks that, like when they played against United, that it looked like you could score at any moment. And if that's the case, there's going to be a lot of goals in this game. Because look, Chelsea aren't the best defensively. I know in terms of fantasy, you have like Zuma and Chilwell who have done very well, and Mendy and Go has gotten pretty good points. But look, anytime you see a team that really attack Chelsea, they concede goals. And so that's a big one. You have Villa and Brighton. Villa been one of the kind of hot teams going on early on, which we will talk about. It's hard to kind of bet against them scoring. Brighton have played pretty well offensively this year as well. But the one on Saturday that really kind of sticks out as like one I can see both teams really going for it is Spurs and City, because both teams aren't the best defensively. Both teams will be losing defenders because of COVID or injuries coming back. It's one of those that I can really see a lot of I could see goals in this game, and a lot of people will ask, well, is it a game that you keep some of your like star players? And I think it is, because I can
100%.
see them really going for each other and trying to get them, because both teams are in need of points as well. Look, City haven't started off that great. They still don't have Aguero. Ferran Torres was excellent for Spain. So that's a big one as well. You've United and West Brom. Look, again, depending on how that game starts off, there could be a lot of goals there. You go to Sunday and you have Fulham and Everton. Everton, if they can find their form with Richarlison back, we've mentioned how bad Fulham has been defensively. You've Sheffield United and West Ham. Again, Sheffield United have been one of those disappointing teams. Leeds and Arsenal. Leeds, all they want to do is attack. Liverpool and Leicester. Look, that's what I was kind of pointing out at earlier on, when you might want a striker from a particular team against the Liverpool backline. This should be a week for Jamie Vardy to score. And then, to be honest, the ones on Monday aren't as appealing, with Burnley and Palace and Wolves and Southampton. Those ones I think could be very cagey games. But the Saturday and Sunday games, you could see where there could be a lot of goals on Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah, when you run through them, there's some absolutely great matchups for any FPL player, and also for the neutral. I think there's going to be some exciting games. When you touched on the first game, the Chelsea-Newcastle game, Chelsea are top scorers. I didn't realise that. They're top scorers in the Premier League. I mean, you'd expect that with the firepower that they've got. Timo Werner's starting to hit form. We haven't seen much from Havertz yet, but he probably won't play. Well, we know he probably won't play. So that's definitely one to look out for. But like I said earlier, the early kickoff never is an easy game to play. United played it beautifully before the break. But looking at it, I don't know what you're going to see from it, because I think having someone like Timo Werner is a really good shout. I've got Chilwell, and he looks like he might be fit to play. It'd be a very good option to have someone like Reece James. Reece James is someone who's been providing quite a lot of returns, and you've got to think that if Chilwell doesn't play, maybe Azpilicueta will play at left back. So all these things you've got to take into consideration. Villa, as you mentioned earlier, we'll talk about Villa's sort of players to bring in, but very free scoring, very entertaining. They were fantastic against Arsenal. Some fantastic signings have come in. And you've got to say, I mean, they're playing Brighton, aren't they? Villa, I believe. Yeah. Oh, I feel sorry for Brighton, because Brighton are a side. If you look at their expected goals, they should have beaten Chelsea early on in the season. They should have beaten United. I think they played Spurs or Arsenal, one of the two. They've been very, very, very good going forward, but they're just not putting the ball in the back of the net. There's been issues with Mope as well in terms of attitude, which he did get dropped before the international break. And you've got to think that if the goals aren't coming now and they're playing well, what happens when they play badly and the chances start to? So that's a worry for them. I think Lamptey's someone that a lot of people do have. I have Lamptey in my defense, and he provides something going forward, which is so key for the defenders at the moment, because no one's keeping clean sheets. The United one stands out for me, but I think a lot of people expect United to go there and, they're playing at home, which is a big thing as well. United haven't won at home in the league, I believe, this season. Everyone's thinking 4-0. I don't think it is. I think it's going to be a very tight game. I don't see United being free-flying. I don't see United creating a lot of chances. There's some very interesting things that I did look up about United, and a lot of it comes down, obviously, as we know, to the formation. If you're going to play two holding defensive-minded midfielders behind Bruno, then automatically that's United's ability to create chances for the forward line. That's immediately diminished. It's something you've got to take into consideration, but I think Bruno Fernandes is a must. And we'll talk about it later, who you bring in for Salah. But if you're going to bring anyone, Bruno's the most transferred player this game week with 482,000. So he's an obvious one. He takes penalties as well. 5 goals, 3 assists, which is ridiculous considering United have been very poor this season. So yeah, it's a difficult one. And the Everton one stand out for me as well. Can James hit some form? Let's see. Calvert-Lewin's a captain option there. But really looking at the Spurs and City game. See, I didn't look into that as closely as you did. You made some interesting points. You think it could be a free scoring game. I think it would be the other way around. I think City need to win. We know that. And very interesting about City, we'll talk about them again in more detail later, but they haven't scored more than 1 goal in the Premier League in a game since the Leicester game, which they lost 5-2. They beat Wolves 3-1 on the opening day. So taking that into consideration, you expect City to blow teams away all the time, 3s and 4s, as they've done over the past 4 years under Pep. They've got a very difficult task at the moment. And you're actually seeing the loss, of David Silva, which has not been spoken about enough. But such an intelligent player. Maybe he wasn't getting on the score sheet and assisting as much, but he was so key to the system, and they're struggling to find that balance in that midfield. So that's an interesting one. I really expect Spurs to just sit back and hit them on the break, and I think they're going to be devastating. And that's why I wouldn't take out Kane and Son. So some very interesting fixtures. Again, you mentioned West Ham. Who are they playing? Sorry?
Sheffield United.
Sheffield United. That's another key one. Cresswell is he's the most creative defender in the whole of fantasy football. I would be looking, if you're looking for a defensive option to come in, and especially if Trent's not playing, which it looks like he's not, then Cresswell's a great option because he offers something going forward. So some good fixtures there. I think in some ways it's actually easier this week than it has been in a lot of weeks to pick out the games that you think will be some outright winners. And then obviously the Leeds and Arsenal game. That's an interesting one because Arsenal just don't offer anything going forward. Not creating enough. This is the lowest that they've created in terms of shots per game, I think, for the last 15 years. That's how one-dimensional they look. So I would probably be looking at that and thinking Bamford, possibly. But then again, this could easily be a 0-0 because Arsenal are good defensively. You've got to give them their credits. I think they're statistically one of the best, if not the best, defense in the league. And you never thought you'd say that.
I think that goes to the point that they're very one-dimensional, that it is having that tough defensive shape. And the problem I see with Arsenal is if, let's say, Liverpool or Leeds come out quick firing, score an early goal, I think Arsenal then have to force themselves to play. And that's when you see Leeds kind of being able to get those 2 or 3 goals like we saw against Liverpool. When Liverpool went all out attack on Leeds and there was space, they were able to create those chances. I want to go back to the Spurs and City game because it's a really interesting one. I completely agree with you in what you're saying about Harry Kane and Son because, look, Spurs have a hard kind of run of games at the moment coming up. But again, I think it's until they prove that they're not going to be scoring and assisting that you kind of keep them in your team. There was some interesting stats on both Son and Harry Kane just in relation to this fixture. So Son, in all competitions, Son has played against Man City 8 times. He has 5 goals and 1 assist. Okay. Harry Kane has played 9 times. He has 2 goals and 2 assists. Look, I think we can go on the other side, and also with kind of De Bruyne has played against Spurs 8 times in all competitions, 3 goals and 5 assists. So they're kind of the 3 big names that you think of when you're thinking of this game. It does depend on how it works out. I feel like if there's an early goal in this game, it makes it open up because both teams are then going to be going for it, especially if City are the first ones to score, because then Tottenham know that they have to go out and they have to attack. And if they don't, then there's a big issue there. The other thing is, like you said, these teams are coming back from international play. They're only going to get a couple of days with their managers. In big games after these international breaks, you tend to see more open games because structurally it's hard to kind of follow a game plan that's really only been in place for 2 or 3 days. Normally when you have a big game like this, a manager is preparing for a full week on what you're going to do, what's plan B. So yeah, I think again, in a lot of these big games, it depends on how it all starts. If it starts off where the teams aren't really going for it, kind of like the United and Chelsea game, well, it stays that way for the whole game. But if there's an early goal or if there's kind of high intense attacks early on, I think that's when you see it open up a little bit more. So that's kind of one that kind of stuck out to me. And one of the other parts of that game that is interesting is what does City do kind of going forward? Because we've seen when they haven't had that central striker that they've struggled to create a lot of chances. Once we saw Aguero come back, you saw that little bit of the old Man City come back, but Aguero's out. You have Gabriel Jesus, who's come back from Brazil, so we don't know how fit he's going to be. Maybe it's a possibility that City play with that false 9 again, and this time it's Ferran Torres that plays there after scoring 3 goals for Spain. I think that's a big one that you could really be looking at. What do you think about kind of Ferran Torres possibly playing in that position this week?
I mean, we might as well jump into the City players. Are they a no-no? This is a really interesting topic. You make some fantastic points. I think what's very odd for me is that when you look at, let's just talk historically quickly about Pep's sides. Pep's been the master playing without a number 9. The false 9 is something that he's always done with great aplomb. And when you're looking at City this season, there's something off. Intensity is down. The creativity is down. The goal contributions are down. Everything going forward looks a bit more labored, and this is something which, I mean, look, we've never seen a Pep side or Pep stay beyond those 3 or 4 years at a club. So, and he's just gone and signed a new 2-year contract. So it's going to be interesting going forward to see what he's got to do. Look, that squad needs an overhaul for sure, I think. And when you're looking at it, Ferran Torres we've been talking about Ferran Torres since he joined City, and a lot of people at Valencia, and you came back with me and said how fantastic and how highly rated he is. I absolutely love him. I think for 20 million, they've got a fantastic player. But, is he ready to lead the line at Manchester City in such a big game? That is a big question you've got to ask. I think Gabriel Jesus is the obvious one. I think he will play. A massive thing that people are overlooking is Mahrez has been so bad this year. He was after restart, he was City's best player. Since he's come back, this season, he's looked really, really terrible. Got dropped from the squad. I think he's going to be his way out in the summer. I think he's an option which a lot of people don't have now. So Phil Foden is the other one. Now, what do City do? How do they set up? I think defensively, they've actually been pretty good. They've been pretty solid. Ruben Diaz has come in and slotted in beautifully. Him and Laporte look like they could be possibly up there with the best centre-back pairings in the league. When I look at City, I don't know what I'm going to get. That's why I haven't put De Bruyne in once, because his returns aren't particularly good. And if you look at De Bruyne's form, he's averaging 3.3 points per game. That is extremely low. Sterling, 2 points per game. He's also got 75% chance playing because he's got a calf injury. So I would be avoiding any City players. I wouldn't be touching them until I can. It's a bit like United, until I can see a sustained run of form. And that's why when you bring it back to Spurs, I mean, Spurs are unbeaten in 5. They look absolutely deadly in front of goal. I did this last week, didn't I? The other week, Son and Kane. They're doing really, really, really well. They're putting up incredible numbers. So, like you said, why should they come out? I mean, you look at their next 3 fixtures. I've got it up here. It's pretty crazy. It's City, Chelsea, Arsenal, Palace, then Liverpool. And that's when you'll see whether they're title challengers or not. They've had quite an easy run. But there's no reason why you shouldn't put them in. Because for me, I actually think they've been the most impressive side. They're not top right now. It's Leicester. But for me, I think Spurs have been the ones who have laid down the marker. So would I bring in City players? Ferran Torres is very reasonable as well. I believe he's around 6 million to bring in. I know he's a midfielder, so with Sterling play essentially, I don't know. So with City, I don't exactly expect to see many goals from them. So a lot of people say De Bruyne, and he's got about, I think, 3 assists and 1 goal. That's low for De Bruyne, isn't it, at this stage in the season? And he's also playing very far on the right. He's not playing essentially. So I wouldn't be touching any City players. They're a no-no for me. I'd be keeping Son and Kane, and I'd be expecting Spurs to win this game.
Yeah, I agree. I think the only City player that I've kept in is mainly for value purposes is Phil Foden, because look, you've seen he played well when he came on for England, and when he has played for City, I think he has been one of the more kind of advanced players. But other than him, I think the only other player, maybe not in terms of a fantasy purpose, but that's actually played quite well this season is Raheem Sterling. I think he's been his normal self, but the rest they just don't look. They don't look like the City that you expect to be able to dominate team after team after team. And it goes to show that there's gonna need to be some retool of that squad, because I always say it is I've usually used it with management, is when someone's there for a longer period of time, it becomes stale. When your squad is pretty much the same for a couple of years, and you're not bringing in like a big name to change it up, especially in a City team where a lot of those players were used to a big name player coming in every single season. When that doesn't happen, things might get stale, and maybe that's what we're seeing with City, that without having that big name come in every year, look, there was obviously the links with Lionel Messi, and whenever that does happen, I suspect it probably happens next year. You might see a
100%
you
with
might
Pep.
see a different Man City for a year where a lot of those players will get rejuvenated. They'll get more space if someone like Messi came in. But yeah, there's a couple little points on some of the other fixtures before we move on. I picked out kind of three other ones. So the Man United West Brom. Now it's not so much that really I only have Bruno that's going to be in my team, because again, even when he's playing bad, he can get a penalty, he can get an assist, can get a goal. So he would stay there. But the interesting one for anybody that's looking for maybe options going forward is that you have to remember Luke Shaw is going to be out for quite a while. And with Alex Telles coming in, how he settles down into the Premier League, because if he settles in and kind of plays similarly to the way he played in his first game, like some of the crossing was excellent. And look, if Cavani's going to be playing, those are two options, kind of maybe not for this week, but if you look at it going forward, if they become kind of those players where if Telles is getting a lot of crosses, look, Luke Shaw got good amount of points in the game against Everton. If that's something that United are going to try and do and have their left back be the one to kind of set up a lot of the chances inside the box, well, then Telles might be a good option going forward.
He also probably take corners, Ciaran. I can imagine he will take corners. He took corners against PSG. I guess PSG. So I do expect him to take corners, and his delivery was fantastic. It's the whip, and it's also the spin on the ball. It's very different to anything United have. As well. Yeah. So when you're looking at Harry Maguire as well, he's picked up some form. If you're going to bring in a United defender, and this is what I was thinking about when you bring in a United defender, I think Telles, you're right, is an option. I wouldn't be touching Wan-Bissaka because he doesn't offer much going forward. So if you're going to bring in another defender, Harry Maguire's always guaranteed to start, I think, if he's fit. Even if he's not that fit. I mean, I said the other day on United Happy Hour, if you haven't seen that, you better check that out. It's a great show that we've got with Paulie and Joe. And I said that there's three certainties in life: death, taxes, and Harry Maguire starting, even if he's not fit, because he's Ollie's man. So if you're looking for a defender in the United side, if Telles is playing to offer some points, apart from Telles, I think Maguire's the obvious one because he'll be a threat in the opposition's box.
Yeah, absolutely. And then look, I think before moving on, the obvious one that we have to talk about is the Liverpool and Leicester game. Liverpool this week, look, most of their defenders are out and are out for kind of the foreseeable future. Look, you have Trent possibly coming back soon, but again, he's out. So this could be the week that if you're banking on kind of getting some really cheap players to go into your team to circumvent some of those backups for Liverpool are probably very cheap. I know there's a couple within those 3 million area, which you would never think to start. But look, Liverpool and that much of a problem with Mo Salah out. The one option that I was thinking even was Diogo Jota. He's a good option. This kind of comes to this question with Mo Salah is, do you keep him because he's most likely back next week? Or do you need to sell, even if it's for a week where you're subbing him in and out? Because, look, for most players, Salah is one of their top players. And really, his value hasn't changed too much from the start of the season because it was already sky high. So is it just one where maybe it's you just use that kind of transfer this week just to get your replacement for Salah, and then maybe make some adjustments to your team from next week after that? Or do you keep him and just ride him on the bench and then can just bring him in?
This is the biggest question of the week, as we've got here. Salah, do you keep or do you sell him? When I look at my options, I have to get rid of him this week because I have nothing on the bench. See, a lot of people play bench boost. For me has never been a card that I've ever done well, or a chip that I've done well, because I don't sack my bench with quality. The only time I'm sacking my bench with any sort of quality is with my goalkeepers. I'm rotating them. That's worked a treat this year. And I've said you got to have two keepers. It's worked so well. I've just rotated them, and they both performed pretty well of late. But look, he's so expensive that I don't think you can afford to keep him on the bench. If you've got one free transfer like I have, Salah out to Bruno. That's an obvious option. And then next week you take him out because I believe they've got, is it Wolves next week? No, Brighton, Hove Albion, then Wolves, Fulham, then Tottenham. So it's a good run of fixtures for Liverpool. When you look at United, they've got Southampton next week, West Ham, then the big one against City. So I think it's a no-brainer. You got to take him out. You mentioned Jota, and I agree. His form at the moment is 6.3. He's been fantastic. 3 goals for Liverpool already. Really impressed with him. If you want a cheaper option and you want to go on, you want to make some more changes, because if you've got a bit of money in the bank, let's say you've got a couple of million or $1 million, even just under, taking Jota out, fixing another area like your defense or your attack, and then you can still bring in Salah next week. For Jota, I think it's an obvious choice. I think another one is, we said Bruno, 7.3, that's his form, 10.6 as well, so you'll be saving a little bit bringing him in. I think that's the most obvious one. I think most people do that. The other one, a bit of a differential, is Mane, though, because when Salah doesn't play, Mane's the one that gets the points. He's very expensive, 12.1, and his form at the moment is pretty good, about 5 points per game. So he's an option. I've got 3 more players. James is one, 7.9. Problem with James, though, is he hasn't really, since his injury, he hasn't really performed. His form at the moment is 1.3. I don't think you can take that into consideration because Everton have been very good, but Fulham is a game which I think you expect Everton to win. With Richarlison back, I think then you might see more of the James we saw earlier on. Doesn't mean he's suddenly a bad player, by the way. It's just the way that things have happened. Sterling, you mentioned. I wouldn't be touching City. De Bruyne as well. I wouldn't be touching City. Joss is the other one. Jack Grealish is an option. I've got Jack Grealish on my side, and I think he's been fantastic. You've got to remember he's played a lot of minutes, so maybe he won't be as fresh. Maybe he won't play. The other option possibly is Zaha as well. He's a player that I've got on my side. I believe they're playing Burnley as well. Milivojevic isn't playing, so he will take penalties. That's a very key one. He did it at Old Trafford where he scored a couple. So all these things put together, he's a good option at 7.2 million. But looking at my side right now, because I'm just going to have a little quick look. Ziyech's another one. I had Ziyech last week and he was fantastic. I'm giving all my secrets away, and Kieran's going to go and coffee them again. No, I'm joking. But look, there's some options. I think you've got to be clever this week. Now, if you've got someone on the bench who can come on for Salah and you can save that for, but remember, if it's 1 free transfer, or even if you make 2 transfers, -4 is not a big hit, really. I mean, you've got 2 free transfers. You can take out Salah, you can bring in a Bruno, and if you captain Bruno and he gets a couple of goals, a goal and an assist, it's worth it. It's completely worth it. So you've got options there, but it all depends what you got on the bench.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's one of those that I'll probably have to figure it out today. I was kind of, because for me, I've had Son on the team and I haven't had Harry Kane, so maybe get Jota to come in for Salah and maybe bring someone else out and put Harry Kane in with those extra points or something along the lines of that. But again, a lot of people
at all in this fan. So you're doing really well considering. That's very interesting. So I've had Son. If I'm looking at my side now, again giving away all my secrets because I got 98 points last week. I mean, I've gone for 2 strikers, Calvert-Lewin and Kane. Then it's Son, Salah, Zaha, Ziyech, and Grealish. I've really packed that midfield with quality, and I got a return from every single player last week, apart from Son. So every single player, and even my defenders.
Yeah, mine was an interesting enough one because, look, I think the one change that I'm definitely making this week is I'm taking out Raul Jimenez, because other than early on in the season, he hasn't really done much for the price that he's at. So that's one where I think of it. Obviously, the Salah, and then I do have to redo my defense a little bit. So I might have to take, even with the 2 free transfers, I may have to do kind of the -4, but that's not a big deal, I don't think. Because the other thing is Wolves is a weird one, because before you were seeing Saiz not play and you had Ait-Nouri playing and you had Cody in there, but now Cody might not play because he was a kind of close contact. Ait-Nouri came out of the French national team, or the under-21s, I think it was, with a small injury, so you don't know if he's playing. So I would say stay away from Wolves over the next few weeks until you really know who's in that defense, because I don't think they know who's in that defense over the next few weeks yet. So that's one to stay away from too. But yeah, it's a tricky one. One of the things that you mentioned were some of the kind of fixtures going forward for some of the teams, and there was one or two that I kind of picked out on. One of them was Villa, actually on kind of the good side, and then I picked out Chelsea. So Villa, while they have Brighton this week, you have West Ham after that. You have Newcastle. You then have Wolves, and then you have Burnley. So you have a pretty decent run of fixtures. And look, you look at Villa and you have Jack Grealish, you have Ross Barkley, you have Ollie Watkins. I think Jack Grealish has been probably the most consistent out of all of them, but it just seems like when Grealish has a really good game, he's getting you between 17 to 20 something points, which is ridiculous. When he's having an okay game, yeah, he might get you 6 or 7. But the difference is when he actually has a really good game. And he's had a couple already this season where you saw the game against Liverpool. I think he ended up with like 25 or 26 points. You had the game recently where he got 17. You've Ollie Watkins as well, who's kind of that player that I think he's transformed that attack line for Villa that's given Grealish, Ross Barkley, that bit of space as well to operate because he's another threat. So do you think that going forward, having at least one of these Villa players in your team is going to be a must?
Yeah, I think so. You're looking at it. You're completely right about Grealish. I was just getting up his, how consistent he is, and you're looking at it now. Game week 2, he got no returns. That's when Villa won. Fulham, the next game, he got a goal. Liverpool's where he really performed, 2 goals, 3 assists. Obviously, that freak result, 24 points, as you mentioned. Leicester, nothing, but they won that game. Leeds, they lost 3-0, nothing. Southampton, he got a goal and 2 assists. Remember, they were 4-1 down before they got that back to 4-3. And then you look at the Arsenal game, he got an assist. He was fantastic. So looking at that, it's 3 points, 8 points, 24, 3, 1, 15, 6. So you're right. It's very up and down, isn't it, with Jack Grealish? And that's what puts a lot of people off. But I feel that's something he's improved this year as a player. He looks like a more consistent player. He looks like a more well-rounded player. He's got better players around him now. He doesn't look like he's doing it on his own anymore. And that's the key. And as you mentioned with Ollie Watkins, I mean, bringing up Ollie Watkins here, he has completely transformed that team. I mean, 47 points. He's valued at 6.1 million. His form at the moment is 7.3. I would say he's probably outperformed. I mean, he's got 6 goals in 8 games. It's absolutely phenomenal. Obviously, a lot, again, fairly streaky. Liverpool, hat-trick and an assist. Scored against Southampton, 1 goal, and he scored against Arsenal. So between game week 4, he blanked in 5 and 6, and then 7 and 8, he's got returns. So he looks like he's hitting some form now. Only owned by 8.1%. Now, I'm not going to bring Watkins in because I think there's better strikers out there. When you look at it, you've got to think, though, is Calvert-Lewin going to keep that form up? That's the key. And if he is, and it depends. Do you want to have 3 strikers or do you want to pack the midfield of 5 good midfielders? I think this year, the midfielders are fantastic. I think you've got so many options there. Ross Barkley plays more further forward than Jack Grealish. And remember when Rob was on, Rob was saying Barkley's going to get more touches in the box, but he's been a great signing. But actually, I just think Grealish is more consistent. I'd bank on Grealish more. So for me, would I be bringing them? I think you've got to have one of the 3. I think it's very, very obvious. A lot of people have Martinez in goal, who's been fantastic.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, see, I don't have him in goal. And the other one's Mings, who's been very good this season as well. Villa are a much better side than they were last year. And I think when people had Grealish in, it was a hope, wasn't it, that Grealish would provide something because he's the most obvious option to do that. But they're a better side. They went to the Emirates and smashed them, a defensive side, 3-0.
Yeah, that's the thing. They just have just that bit more quality. And I feel like last year was that kind of transition year. Often we see championship teams come to the Premier League, and like we see with Leeds this year, and they're playing really, really well. But then we do also get some of those teams that just barely survive and build on that. And it looks like, and that's usually more sustainable, where you have a team that goes through those tough times, is able to survive, they actually add more quality to their team going forward. And it kind of gives them that kind of good platform. Like Villa were fine defensively for the most part last year. There was a couple of games where they looked terrible. But you look at it this year, they brought in a goalkeeper that's really helped them. They still have that stable defense, and you've seen the improvements from Jack Grealish with Ollie Watkins as well, Ross Barkley. It's just the overall quality is better. Kind of the last kind of big question that even we've kind of seen around kind of Twitter over the last kind of day or two has been what we think the highest scoring player is going to be for week 9. This is a really tough one. I'll go first in terms of just because I looked at the matchup, and I think it's probably going to be one of the Everton players just because it's against that Fulham defense. With Richarlison coming back as well, and them not having to play on the Saturday, it probably helps with James kind of because he's coming back a little bit later than other players. I would probably go with Calvert-Lewin just because of the kind of defense they're against. But look, it's hard to not give it to kind of Son or Kane as well. So what would you think for that question? Who do you think is going to be the top scorer in week 9?
Oh, that's difficult. That's very, very difficult. I think Calvert-Lewin's an interesting one. I'm a bit unsure with Everton at the moment. I'm not sure whether James will start. I think he probably will because Everton's options are actually quite they're quite bare actually. When a big player gets injured, we saw that with Richarlison. I mean, Bernard scored against United, but he's nowhere near what Richarlison does. And I think if Richarlison had played against United, it would have been a very different game. He likes to run beyond the final man. He likes to stretch the defense, and Everton didn't have that in that game, and it made it very ezy for United. We know that United don't like to look behind them because there's no pace there, behind the defensive line. So Richarlison plays, I think Everton comfortably wins. So Calvert-Lewin is definitely an option. I'm going for Bruno Fernandes because I just think even though United don't score a lot of goals, I'm saying that because we don't at the moment, we don't create enough chances, but he's 31 goal contributions in 33 games is world class. No midfielder scored more non-penalty goals than Bruno. So when people say he's a penalty merchant, well, actually he's scored 7 goals, which aren't penalty ones since he's joined. And chances created as well. He's just behind Salah, who's on 21. He's got 20. Grealish is up there as well. You should look at the guys. You need to look at that, how many chances are created, because that actually gives you a good indication who to bring in midfield. It's very well saying, I want to bring in, for example, Jared Bowen because it's an easy fixture. But how creative is he? And that's the key. So Bruno Fernandes, I think for me, is the obvious one. He's in the captain's option. But then you can't really look past Timo Werner as well. The question is, are Newcastle going to give a lot of space behind? No. And that's what you got to look at as well. Is this an Olivier Giroud game or Tammy Abraham? Possibly. So that's why Werner is someone I probably wouldn't bring in. I haven't had him in actually at all this year, even though he's hit some form. And the final one, I would say, and this is going to be a bit controversial, is one of the Spurs duo, because if they can catch City out on the break, which we've seen against Leicester, they're really, really, really susceptible with a bit of pace behind, then I think, you could be seeing 2 or 3 goals in that game. I just think Pep might be a bit more smart. I feel like he knows he can't lose this game. I don't think he's going to be as gung-ho going forward. I think he's actually going to be much more measured. And we saw against Liverpool, City started to play some really nice stuff after they got their goal. So for me, look, if I'm going to choose a player standout, it'd be Bruno Fernandes, I think. He's the player for me who, as well as he's on penalties, I think he's going to get some returns. And I would probably captain him. He's a safe bet.
Yeah, absolutely. To kind of finish off today, just because there has been so many players out and players being injured, we've mentioned some of them earlier. A lot of these kind of top-rated players haven't gotten the highest point total, so I thought it was a good idea to kind of mention 1 or 2 players that you could transfer in that maybe isn't the highest in terms of the price, but might actually save you in the long term if you bring them in, they have a good week, and it might be one where you actually keep them in your team and take one of your more high-priced players out. The couple that I kind of noted down, 1 or 2 we've spoken about already. Jack Grealish, I think, is one of the main ones. At 7.5 million, at this point already of 60 points is ridiculous. If you want kind of defenders, the 2 that I picked out were kind of Kurt Zouma at 5.4 million and he has 48 points. in the ICT kind of index for defenders, he ranks 9th out of 218. And then also Vestergaard from Southampton, who also used 4.7 million and has 40 points. And he ranks 16th out of 218 defenders in the ICT index. The kind of last one that I mentioned earlier that is one that's been on my mind for the past couple of weeks because he's actually been playing quite well is Diogo Jota for Liverpool. He seems to be the one on the end of many of their chances. So you don't see Firmino being the one getting into the box. You don't, even though Salah and Mane have been great, they kind of get in behind from the wings. But the player that you're seeing scoring some of those scruffy goals is Diogo Jota. So he's one that I've been thinking of getting in. Look, he's only played a couple of games for Liverpool in the Premier League. 6.5 million and he has 28 points. For the amount of games he's played compared to the points that he's got, it's pretty good. And that's, I think, one viable option that kind of fantasy players can use going forward.
Great options. Jota's one like this morning when I was doing a bit of research, I looked and I thought, yeah, he's going to start because Salah's not playing. And I think you probably can't really write off Liverpool. A lot of people are writing them off saying, oh, they might lose. And I think they're susceptible at the back. But looking at Liverpool's forward line, it's still formidable. Still very formidable. And I think Jota's a great option. The price is so good, isn't it? 6.5 million. He's half of Salah and Mane, pretty much.
Yeah.
He's actually, for me, he's probably been better than Mane. I haven't really seen much of Mane to think, no, he's a player to bring in. One of mine might be a bit funny. I'm going to be jumping from screens, guys. So if you hear my mouse clicking, it's because I'm just having a look at just so I can get some more detail into it. Looking at Che Adams, last 3 games, 2 goals and an assist. Since Ings has got injured, he's actually stepped up. He's someone, as you talked about the ICT index, he's 10th out of 76 out of the forwards. He's got 41 points so far, so I've been really impressed with him. If you're going to a defender, you mentioned him earlier, Aaron Cresswell. He's gone up in the price now, 5.1. He's in the top 5 for defenders. And at the moment, I mean, look, he's 2nd in the ICT index. So he's someone, if you want to bring, who's a little bit cheaper, and he's got a good fixture this week against Brighton. And if we're going to go to a midfielder, you can't really look further than James Ward-Prowse. 6 million. He looks like he's got a hamstring injury, so he might not play this week, but he's been fantastic in his last 3 games. He's got 2 goals and an assist. Obviously, the Villa game, he was very, very, very good. And he's just, I mean, his form's 10.3. He's only owned by 7.1%. Southampton has a surprise package this year. I'm impressed with Southampton, and I like what I see from them. So he would probably be my last one. So they're a little bit, I would say a little bit out of the box, those sort of signings. I mean, you mentioned Vestergaard as well. He's been very good. Kyle Walker-Peters has been a great signing for me. He's been providing returns in defense. So, yeah, those would be my 3 players. And I think there's a lot of options for you guys this week.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of those mid-range players that people can really look at and try and help their team this week and maybe give them a couple of options when some of these bigger players do come back, like Mo Salah. Thanks for joining me this week, Haider. I think when we come back from international break, it's always difficult because it's been a while since the Premier League games have kind of gone on and it might not be as fresh in people's minds. Just so everybody knows, just make sure you have your transfers in before 11 a.m. tomorrow. Luckily, there's no Friday games this week where we don't have to scramble and try and get it done for 7 o'clock on a Friday.
Friday killers, aren't they? That's been the hardest thing this year, I reckon.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, everybody, make sure that you hit like, subscribe. Make sure you follow along in all your different areas where you can get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, all those that we're everywhere. Also, follow us along on Twitter and give the channel a subscription. All right, thanks, guys.